All set to go? Good. Well, listen, firstly, can I just say good afternoon and welcome and thank you for being here at this announcement of our National's Fiscal Plan. It's great to be here with Nicola Willis, who will make an outstanding Finance Minister if we're privileged enough to get to government on October the 14th. And we're also here with Simeon Brown, National's Transport spokesperson as well. Look, as I've repeatedly said, when you strip away all of the noise of this election, it boils down to the economy and which party can rebuild it after 6 years of decline and of Kiwis going backwards. And it's only through a strong economy that we can actually end the cost of living crisis, that we can lift wages, that we can reduce interest rates and afford the public services that we all want and deserve, like better schools and education and health hospitals and police. But Labour has shown economic mismanagement and vandalism on a scale we've never seen before in New Zealand. And at the end of the day, there are only two numbers I want Kiwis to understand, and that is 80% and $100 billion. That's because government spending has increased by $1 billion a week and is up 80%, and debt has risen from $5 billion to $104 billion forecast, which will require up to $11 billion in servicing costs, which is more than we spend on primary and secondary school education. And the reality is, despite all of that spending and all of that borrowing, New Zealanders haven't seen a material improvement in the public services that they so deserve. There hasn't been an 80% improvement in health or education. There hasn't been an 80% improvement in roading or infrastructure or the environment or lower crime. And every family now is paying for Labour's addiction to spending, which has driven higher inflation and higher interest rates and kept the cost of living going on for longer. We're paying with it for higher food, higher rents and higher mortgages across the board. And Labour's only approach to the economy, frankly, is to spend more, to tax more and to borrow more. And New Zealand cannot afford to continue down this path that is costing every household so much. The country certainly cannot afford another 3 years of it, and we can only imagine how much faster things would deteriorate economically with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori added to the coalition. The bottom line is this, is we are not better off after 6 years of this government, and we definitely will not be better off in 3 years' time under a Labour government. National knows that you can't spend your way through to a strong economy, just like in your own household, you can't spend your way to a better financial position. National will deliver disciplined spending, less tax and less debt. National will reduce the allocation for new spending in upcoming budgets, but will still put money where New Zealanders need it, and will put more into health and more into education every year. We have built into our fiscal plan significant buffers of unallocated spending to respond to cost pressures and also the unexpected. More broadly, our plan will improve New Zealand's fiscal resilience by delivering lower debt and higher surpluses. Now let me hand you over to Nicola to take you through the detail of National's fiscal plan. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate that you've had an opportunity to review our fiscal plan in full. In these slides, I'm going to take you through some of the key elements. The goal of this fiscal plan is to restore disciplined government spending, to lower taxes and to lead to a path of less debt. We present this fiscal plan in a very troubling economic context. New Zealand is in its third year of a cost of living crisis with sticky inflation and high interest rates. Government debt levels have soared from just $5.5 billion in 2019 to $73 billion today and forecast to hit $100 billion by 2025. The other important contextual factor here is Labour's consistent outspending of their budget allowances. They have broken every single spending commitment they have made, which means that the relative levels of restraint forecast in the pre-election update are very unlikely to be achieved by them. National has adopted 5 fiscal principles which are reflected in this plan. We wish to return to surplus and reduce debt. We want to support frontline services, invest in the infrastructure needed to support productive growth of the New Zealand economy, restore discipline to government spending to ensure value for the taxpayers' money that we spend, and to deliver tax relief. We remain very conscious of the fact that while there have been inflation adjustments for many, taxpayers have still not had tax thresholds inflation adjusted. This table sets out the difference in approach to our future operating allowances. What it demonstrates to you is our plan to carefully reduce future spending beyond that implied by the pre-election update. We will reduce the operating allowance next year from the proposed $3.5 billion, 300 million less to 3.2. The following year, the budget operating allowance will be 400 million less, and in budgets 26 and 27, 300 less than proposed. The fact that there is a $300 million reduction in budget 24 rather than a larger reduction reflects the fact that there are significant pre-commitments that the government has already made against next year's budget, and we have, where appropriate, honoured those commitments. This table shows you the cumulative impact of reducing operating allowances over time. The reason this is important is because what it demonstrates is that small savings now, over time, build up in significance. The reverse is also true. Labor's insistence on constantly outspending its operating allowances has had a cumulative impact on spending and debt over time. What this table demonstrates is that over the forecast period, National will be spending $3.3 billion less in future operating allowances. On page 7 of the full document, you can see the rundown of operational commitments in detail. This is a summary table which demonstrates the approach we have taken. We have adopted the figure provided by Treasury in the pre-election update, which they have taken to be the funding required to meet cost pressures in the health sector. We have then funded our additional health commitments on top of that. This is in order to preserve our fiscal principle of ensuring that we can continue to improve frontline services and ensure that New Zealanders can rely on them. We have made a number of additional education commitments in our policy announcements, and those are funded here. In addition, we have made law and order commitments. I will go into some more detail about this in another slide, but they comprise funding to support our youth offending policy, to support additional police, and to support a potential increase in the prison muster as a result of stronger sentencing policies. We have made significant operational commitments to transport. I again will go through this in a bit more detail in a future slide, but funding transport requires both operational and capital funding, and we are taking a different approach to this than Labor because we are not prepared to increase petrol taxes next term. That is the last thing that New Zealanders struggling through a cost of living crisis need. Finally, we have previously announced our policy decision to revert to the historic norm of indexing benefits to the cost of living. What you can see in this table is that we have made total spending commitments which are less than the operating allowances we have put aside. What this means is that we have significant funding left over even after we've funded all of these commitments. This creates buffers in our plan, $9.9 billion over the forecast period of buffers, and the intention of those is to meet the capacity pressures, the cost pressures, the pressures that arise in government. In particular, we've ensured that in our first budget next year there is a large buffer of more than $1 billion to allow for any unforeseen costs. We think this is a conservative approach, a prudent approach, and the right approach. So these significant buffers of unallocated spending mean that we will be able to meet costs for future pressures, as I've laid out. Just a quick note on capital allowances. We will be maintaining the contributions to the multi-year capital allowance at the same rate forecast in the pre-election fiscal update. This reflects our priority of ensuring we have the funding available to invest in the infrastructure New Zealand needs to support the economic growth we want to see. So this plan requires no reduction in forecast infrastructure investment. We have made some specific allocations from the capital allowance to the Transport Fund, for the Waikato Medical School and Dunedin Hospital expansion, and for the potential retrofitting of military facilities for youth offender military academies. There is still a significant amount of unallocated funding in the multi-year capital allowance available for other capital needs that may transpire. This slide sets out what the implications of these decisions are for debt reduction and the path to surplus. Essentially, by spending less, we will be able to reduce the size of forecast deficits and return a larger surplus in 2026-2027 than was forecast at pre-FU. Over time, this will mean that we are able to reduce debt faster, with $3.4 billion less in debt than was forecast at pre-FU. This graph compares the debt forecasts at the pre-election update with what National was able to achieve with our more prudent plan. As you can see, we are able to get debt back under $100 billion from the fiscal year 2027-2028, from which point we expect it to track down. A note on transport funding, because I recognise that this is an area that can be potentially quite confusing. National has already set out our ambitious program of investment in New Zealand's transport network to support our plan to rebuild the economy. National will be contributing $3.7 billion to the National Land Transport Fund over the coming 4 years. $2.1 billion of that is an operating commitment and $1.6 billion is a capital contribution. This replaces $3.8 billion of commitments made by Labor. They've gone about things in a different way, including $1.2 billion in operating, a $500 million contribution for the Climate Emergency Response Fund. You'll recall at the pre-election fiscal update, they made the decision to take $500 million out of the Climate Fund and put it into the Transport Fund. We're not doing that. We're retaining that $500 million for our tax reduction plan. They have also, of course, forecast $2.1 billion in extra revenue from petrol taxes. So we've gone about constructing our transport fund in a different way, as this slide sets out. A note on additional funding commitments. In law and order, we do expect the prison population to rise as a result of our tougher sentencing policies. The prisons currently have capacity for at least 2,000 more prisoners. We've seen a significant reduction in prisoner numbers under Labor, but no corresponding decrease in the operational costs of prisons. We have set aside a total of $718 million in contingency to allow for the potential extra costs of more prisoners in our prisons. The way we've gone about getting to that figure is we have estimated roughly 350 extra prisoners in year 1, 700 year 2, 1,100 year 3 and 1,400 year 4. We've taken the average cost of a prisoner to be around $200,000, which is the current average cost of a prisoner. We've released to you our Castalia external review. They note that they think we're overestimating prisoner costs because they think the marginal cost of an extra prisoner is lower than the overall average. We've taken a conservative approach here and put this in contingency to allow for something that we think will potentially occur. But in government, we will have to review on an annual basis what the actual effects of sentencing policy are on the prison muster. We have made a conservative allowance for an increasing muster. In health, as I said, we have adopted the health capacity pressure allocation set out by Treasury and have funded additional health commitments on top of this. We've also, as I've said previously, allowed significant buffers so that in future budgets we will have the capacity to commit to extra health initiatives. Social housing, we are maintaining the existing social housing capital allocations in Budget 2023, which span the 23-24 years and the 24-25 years. There is funding available in the capital allowance for potential future allocations, but as previously signalled by Chris Bishop, we want to first do a complete review of Kāinga Ora's approach to delivery of social housing. We have concerns about the efficiency with which they are doing this. So in short, our fiscal plan requires less government spending than was forecast at the pre-election update. and that will mean less pressure on inflation and on interest rates. We've put our plan together cautiously. This is a plan that we fully intend to deliver. We are not prepared to take the approach that Labor has in their fiscal plans before the last two elections, in which they put together a plan that blows apart with its first contact with reality. This is a series of commitments that we think we can commit to. We are delivering disciplined spending, less tax, lower debt, and large buffers for future cost pressures, while increasing funding for frontline services and investing in infrastructure. This is our disciplined spending, lower taxes and less debt fiscal plan, and I'll invite Chris and Simeon up so we can have your questions.
Just on the $9.9 billion contingency that you've worked in, you've been very critical about the current government about raiding the COVID fund and using that for fishing cameras on fishing boats and whatnot. Are you going to specifically put this money in a silo so you can't touch it for a pet project that is specifically there for what you call the rainy day? And I guess part two of that question is, who gets to decide what a rainy day is? Is there a specific category, or will you work that out as a cabinet?
No, that's not quite the way we're approaching it. What we've done in each year is left funding aside from our operating allowances that will be available for budget bids. So we do expect that that money will be spent on initiatives, whether that's, for example, increasing operational funding for schools, whether that's increasing funding for cost pressures that may exist elsewhere in government, or to allow for overs or unders anywhere else in the Crown spending and accounts. So that is simply about taking a responsible approach to budget management, which we believe means that when we're putting together the budget next year, we need to anticipate now that there will be costs we haven't foreseen and that we will need to meet.
But why not silo it? Why was there any thought given to have it in a specific fund so you can't touch it and so politics can't get in the way?
This is in line with typical budget practice as it's normally done.
Are you happy with just having reduced spending for the sake of very slightly lower debt and very slightly higher surplus?
For you to believe that this is only slightly lower debt and slightly lower spending, you need to believe that Labor are going to stick to the plan they set out in the pre-election update. And if you believe that, I guess you also believe in the tooth fairy, because they are not going to stick to the commitments they've made. We should judge them on their track record, which is they have never stuck to a single budget operating allowance that they have set. Their fiscal plan in 2017 blew apart with its first contact with reality because they didn't set aside any buffers for future pressures. Their fiscal plan in 2020, in terms of the operating allowances it set aside, bears no resemblance with what went on to happen in government. So I don't accept that the pre-election fiscal update is an accurate depiction of what a future Labor-led government would deliver. I think what we've put together is responsible. It achieves the things that are important to us, which is ensuring we're providing tax relief to people in a cost of living crisis, ensuring we've got the money needed to deliver quality frontline services, particularly in health and education, ensuring we've got the funding for a tougher approach to law and order, making sure we are bringing discipline to spending, reducing debt and delivering surplus.
The criticism around your tax plan, are you 110% sure there are no fiscal holes in this plan?
Yes, we are. What we have done at every step in our financial process is take a conservative approach. In our tax plan, there were aspects that our external reviewer said, look, we don't think it's going to cost that much, for example, family boost. And we've always chosen the conservative approach. We've left buffers in our tax plan. We've also left buffers in this plan today. As you can see, in our first year of this plan, the tax plan actually raises more than $500 million more than is needed to deliver the income tax reduction we've promised. In every budget, we've left sufficient buffer so that if there are unforeseen costs or things we haven't imagined yet today, we're in a good, strong position to meet them.
Does this plan take into account, does your cumulative fiscal saving of $3.3 billion include the 6.5% reduction in baseline that you're proposing to ask agencies and departments to give you next year?
Yes.
So that then let's then.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. I think what you're asking me is, are we still doing the 6.5% reduction in the departmental costs of the 24 agencies? The answer is yes, we are, and those savings have been booked against our tax plan. You can see that in the page, on the table on page 7, if I take you to that. We have, in that table, in terms of our tax plan, looked at the cost of the tax relief initiatives as one line item. The savings made from savings and reprioritisations is another line item, and then another line item of the new revenue initiatives. So the 6.5% reduction is contained within that savings and reprioritisations line.
You booked $2 billion in savings over the forecast period from the benefit changes. You increased spending on prisons by $700 million over the same period. Are you just repeating the moral and fiscal failure that Bill English said was the justice system?
No, I'd utterly reject that. We're just reverting to what's been the historic norm of ensuring that benefits keep up with the cost of living.
You talked about how people on low and middle incomes are struggling with the cost of living, but isn't taking $2 billion out of the welfare system over 4 years going to exacerbate that for people who are already probably finding it pretty tough?
We're going to increase benefits every year we are in office to ensure that they keep up with the cost of living. What's more, we're going to deal with some of the underlying drivers of the cost of living crisis, including not adding more petrol tax. That will be of benefit to low-income households, including not continuing to add more taxes to landlords that have accelerated rents. That will be of benefit to low-income households.
What do you say to beneficiaries who, again, as I said, are probably finding it pretty tough with high rents and high cost of living, that they wouldn't be getting as much as they necessarily would under Labor?
I'd say to them, we'll make sure that you get an increase to your benefit every year. And what's more, we'll ensure that this is an economy that's growing strongly, so you have an opportunity for paid work if you are able.
But that is, I know the interest is not going to be as high.
Sorry,
as
Katie.
you get under Labor, is it?
What we're saying very clearly is we're going to make sure that beneficiaries are protected through the cost of living, through making sure they're inflation adjusted. And Nicola's right, we're going to deal with the underlying causes of inflation to lower inflation. We're going to make sure that we're not passing on fuel taxes at this time, which can add, as you know, $8 to an average car fill each and every week. We're going to work very hard on housing to make sure that we get an increased supply, so we actually put downward pressure on housing costs as well. So, for beneficiaries, we're being really clear. We're reverting back to what has been the long-standing convention to say we're going to make sure that your payments are protected in terms of the cost of living and the purchasing power they have. Sorry, just Jane.
So, coming back to, I know it's sometimes quite difficult to compare Labor and National depending on the circumstances of individual families, but also if you look at the, public transport, people will be paying for public transport, including, families with kids, prescriptions. Doesn't that all start to balance off those savings that you've just outlined?
Well, what we've said is also we will have people be able to access and get subsidised prescriptions. Let's just be clear on that. We're saying people that can afford to pay should pay for them, and actually the money that we raise through that is actually how we'll fund 13 new cancer treatments.
Transport, if you think about a family that have got 3 young kids and they would have free bus fares, to school and back, that's quite a lot of money.
Yeah, and that's why benefits will increase each and every year to adjust for the rising cost of living that they're encountering. And that's a tradition that is a convention that we've had in the past, and we think is the appropriate way to manage it going forward. And at the same time, we're going to create an economy, and as we've talked about, in a world where we've had low levels of unemployment and we've had lots of worker shortages everywhere, to put 60,000 more people on a job seeker benefit who are capable and able to be working at a time when we can't get them off welfare into work, we need to be able to get that transition happening in a much better way too.
I know it's been traversed, but there's details here about savings and revenue gathering and that sort of thing, but what we don't have the detail is those 6% cuts to public savings, that public services, and people will be worried about that in terms of what impact that could have on their lives and the services that they can access. So what commitments or guarantees are you making in terms of the impact on people's lives?
Well, we have been really clear to say right from the get-go, and we've been saying this now, Nicola and I, for over a year, that we will see increases in health and education every year. We've actually said there are government agencies where there won't be, we expect those increases to be going through, health, education, police, all that good stuff. What we're saying with the other 24 core agencies is, look, there's been a massive growth in actual, head count. There's been a massive growth in spend across that whole government department. We've had an 80% increase in government spending. So, no, but what I'm just saying is, from a practical point of view, what we're asking the CEOs to say say is, look, we want to see the numbers. We want 6.5% of savings. How you deliver those, you are best placed as a CEO of a large organisation to just be very clear about the priorities that we're asking you to deliver for, and make sure that all your activity matches up and delivers that.
There are lots of services other than health and education that are important to people's lives and can make quite a lot of difference.
Absolutely.
In lots of different ways. So,
And that's why we want...
educating responsibility, I suppose, by asking
No,
CEOs rather
no.
than saying, actually, well, this is what we want.
No, this is the big difference between Labor and National. They measure success by how much money is being spent. We measure success by the results that are being achieved. We're going to have better public service targets across all of our public services in New Zealand, so that everybody's focused on the outcomes and on the results that we're trying to achieve, so that we can actually deliver and improve daily lives for Kiwis. Now, having got that set of outputs and metrics in place, that's what we want CEOs to then be ruthlessly focused on, sharpening their organisations up to deliver against that. So if that means stopping dumb projects that don't lead to those outcomes, stop them. And on the result we're trying to achieve, so that we can actually deliver and improve daily lives for Kiwis. Now, having got that set of outputs and metrics in place, that's what we want CEOs to then be ruthlessly focused on, sharpening their organisations up to deliver against that. So if that means stopping dumb projects that don't lead to those outcomes, stop them. If that means not filling in vacancies, if that means actually moving the 200 comm staff out to 200 nurses in the front line, we want everything to be out of the back office into the front line, delivering on those goals and those targets that were set. That's how we'll get a different set of outcomes actually from an equivalent amount of money, because we're going to manage and focus it and deliver it in a better way.
Could you walk us through a bit of the transparency around this one? Your tax cut package comes into force 1st of July from memory next year, so that means that you would have to have a quantifiable amount of money and a quantifiable set of things that are going to be cut. A, can you commit to telling the New Zealand public what is going to be cut? And B, will you need some sort of mini budget once this is being delivered, so you can actually go into some detail that's not just a surface level, we've left it to chief executives?
Yeah, I can confirm that we will be delivering a mini budget for Christmas, before Christmas, in which we set out some of the savings and reprioritisations that we believe are necessary to get New Zealand back on track. The process we intend to take is transparent. I would note that in the pre-election fiscal update, the Finance Minister booked 2% across the board baseline reduction in spending, and I'm yet to see a very detailed examination of what that involves. Our approach is different. What we have said is we've identified 24 agencies, collectively their departmental costs. So that's not their outputs, that's not the funding they're giving to external services, that's the costs of running themselves, have collectively risen by more than 60%. What we're proposing is that they reduce the costs of running themselves by 6.5% on average. The process we will run in the lead up to Christmas is we will ask chief executives, together with senior public servants, to identify those areas in their own departments where they can make savings and reprioritisations. We'll have those recommendations come up to ministers. Ministers, you're right, will be ultimately accountable for decision making.
So they've got essentially, I mean, it's if you're elected on October 15th, Christmas, let's call it December 13th that you do this, that's still only about 2 months for these chief executives to look at baseline cuts of 6.5%, which is, we're talking billions of dollars. Are you giving them enough time, or is this just a political tool that you want to have this 100-day plan?
I'm told many of them are already working on it.
Can I just follow up? What do you mean you're told they're working on it?
Well, what I mean is, and I'm sorry, that was a rough way of me saying what I mean. What I mean is, I'm told that departments are already thinking about where are the areas we could make savings or reprioritisations, which you would expect because they're currently in a process with the current administration where they've been asked to reduce their spending across the board.
That's extremely inappropriate. You're not the government yet.
Well,
ahead of yourself. So
Jason, that's why I'm clarifying and being clear that I don't think there are any public servants acting inappropriately. What I think they are doing, in line with the times, which is appropriate, is they've seen the forecast debt, they've seen the deficits, they've seen that any future government, be it Labor-led or National-led, is going to be looking for savings and reprioritisations. And let's remember, public servants are there because they want to do the right thing by New Zealanders. They want to make a good impact. And so they are thinking about where are the areas where we could possibly tighten the government belt. I applaud them for that. I think it's totally appropriate, and I think there's nothing political about it.
Sorry, Katie. I'll come to this.
Will you readjust those tax cuts and so forth and let people know ahead of next year's budget? Because that is, as Jason's saying, that is quite a short amount of time for them to go ahead and find 6.5%.
As I say, it'll only be a mini budget before Christmas. The full budget we will deliver in May next year.
But if you can't promise those tax cuts, for instance, coming in the next year, there isn't enough savings found in that mini budget, will you reassess your plan?
All I'd say, Katie, is just think about the magnitude of government spending that has taken place. So we've increased this government's increased government spending by 80%, $1 billion extra a week, and we're asking for a 6.5% savings in the back office of these core agencies. So for us, let's be clear, put it a little bit into perspective. Actually, the federal government spend versus what we're actually asking to deliver. Sorry. No, we're going to deliver those savings. It's important. It's really important that we actually have a public service that is delivering on outcomes and that we are moving resources out of the back office and giving lower middle income folk tax relief, and also making sure that we're moving resources and recycling resources to the front line so that we can deliver outcomes, because that's what we're here to do. Sorry, I'll come to Thomas and I'll come back.
The child poverty reduction numbers that you've come to, they're measured by household income, relative income. So if you do make this benefit change, you're going to detach beneficiaries' household income from other households' incomes, which would, by the metric that you are judged against, put people into poverty.
Well, as Nick has alluded to, there are lots of variables around what drives child poverty. We are committed to the legislation and to the goals. Yes, there's 9 different metrics. There's also an increase in kids living in benefit-dependent homes. There's been kids on material hardship. We look at all of those metrics. We are committed to delivering on that. But benefits is only one part of it. We start to slug on a fuel tax, for example, that adds $8 a week to filling up a car on average. That doesn't help. When you start to not deal with the housing and the dynamics in the housing market, that doesn't help.
I guess the question is, though, that the way that those targets are measured and the way that you've signed up to produce them is that it is a relative metric of one group of people's household income and another group of people's household income. And if you detach those two households, then by the definition that you're judged against, more will be in poverty. So how do you fix that if not lifting up the income?
Well, we grow the economy is what we need to do. We actually need to grow the economy and get people from welfare into work, because we've got jobs being created and good high-paying jobs being created. That's why child poverty can't just be seen as being linked solely to benefit. There are a whole bunch of other dynamics and factors that are at play, and it's about economic management to be able to create a growing economy that creates jobs, moves from welfare into work, and importantly deals with some of the other issues around tax, around housing, around other things.
Are you committed to keeping the measures that it's currently measured against?
Yes, I'm particularly focused, though, I have to be honest, on children in benefit-dependent homes, and I've been particularly focused on children in material hardship. And so we are committed to those goals, we're committed to the legislation, no change there. The way in which we deliver that is about better economic management to create more opportunity for everyone. Sorry, I'll come to you and then Glenn. Sorry. Can I just go here and I'll come to you, Glenn? Sorry, mate.
Policies that come out of coalition negotiations, New Zealand First in 2017 wanted a $3 billion provincial growth fund. How are you going to deal with those sort of policies that come up?
Well, as Nicola has highlighted to you with the fiscal plan, there is buffers that we have built in. We've been very conservative. We know that there are shocks to our economy. There are things that can be unexpected that can happen, but we have enough, unallocated spending, as you have seen, that we can accommodate that, I guess. But more importantly, we can accommodate the rainy day that's inevitably going to come again. And I think what's really sad for New Zealanders, as I said at the very beginning, is I really want New Zealanders to understand the gravity and the seriousness of our economic situation. A government over 6 years has increased spending by 80%. And that's a huge number. We've never seen that before. And we have not had an 80% improvement in services. As a government that has run up debt like we've never seen before. And as a result, our capacity, that's why we've got to get ourselves back on a track, and as you see it towards the back end of this 4-year period, back onto a track of reducing debt so we actually can have the capacity for a rainy day again.
Did you design that buffer knowing that you're going to have to give some money to your coalition partners?
No, our focus is on making sure we can deal with what gets thrown at us economically and making sure that we've got some dynamic leverage as we go forward with unallocated spending. But the vast majority is make sure that we don't know what will be coming at us in the next 2 years, and we'll make sure that we're doing it. No. Well, let's be clear. I don't want to work with Winston Peters. I don't want to work with Winston Peters.
You've said you've got $9.9 billion as a
To deal with the shocks in the economy as we go forward.
So is Winston Peters a shock in the buffer to the economy?
We do not want to work with Winston Peters. Our message is really clear. If New Zealand wants to change this government, they need to party vote national, and that's been our consistent message.
How big a provincial growth fund would you be prepared to agree to with Mr. Peters?
That is not the approach that we believe in. We believe in creating city and regional deals, and that's what we've talked about in great detail with local government. And we already have local government starting to think about how they can work together and what we can develop together.
But that's not the way to the coalition negotiations.
I don't think that's the right way. I don't think it's the right way.
It's not what you want there. It's going to be what he wants.
And again, my preference is we won't be dealing with him. We are only going to pick up the phone.
You are going to have a coalition partner.
Correct.
Are you prepared
As will Labour's fiscal plan, dealing with Greens and Te Pāti Māori.
Are you prepared to make changes to some of your promises and some of your spending if you have to, rather than tapping into that buffer to pay for some of those coalition promises?
Well, this is our national fiscal plan. This is our view of how we think we will run our economy going forward. Of course, New Zealand people will deliver what they deliver on October the 14th, and we will form a coalition that will be constructive and actually focused on these goals of actually improving our economy, reducing crime, improving health and education.
If they want you to cut spending more, are you willing to do that?
Again, we'll get into coalition conversations on the other side. It's up to the New Zealand people. They are in charge in an MMP environment and in this election. And our message very clearly is we need strong, stable government. I think what you've seen today, as demonstrated by Nicola's presentation, is economic responsibility and economic prudence. And we've actually been very thoughtful and very cautious about how we build our plan going forward. And unlike this government for the last 6 years that has failed to deliver on any of its track. No, but I'm clear about the cost.
Isn't it incredibly disingenuous for Nicola Willis to start this by saying we have a $10 billion fiscal buffer for natural disasters, for economic shocks, and then you, a few minutes...
Jason, stop. You're misinterpreting what I said. What I said to you very clearly is that we have built in buffers to deal with uncertainty economically, and we have lots of buffer and flexibility in that. We don't know what the situation is and how dynamic it will be going forward. We have seen that in New Zealand's history over the last 30 years, and so we're being really responsible and cautious and responsible about that.
Include a contingency for coalition?
No, we are focused on our fiscal plan, but there is flexibility as we have built into this fiscal plan to deal with situations that arise into our future.
Back on child poverty,
yes.
The Children's Committee indexing benefits to wage growth was the most important thing that has been done to reduce child poverty. Labor will say you're condemning children to poverty through this change.
I disagree strongly. I think what's condemning children to poverty is putting 60,000 more people on unemployment benefit at a time of record job shortages and low unemployment. That is unacceptable. If you cannot move people from welfare into work at a time when you have lots of job opportunities and worker shortages, there is something seriously wrong, and this government has failed on that account. We know the better pathway for anyone is not to condemn them and have them languishing on welfare, is actually to get them in meaningful work so they can actually move forward with their life in a much better way. And that's what we're going to do. Because we are making sure that we can grow this economy to create powerful jobs that actually empower paychecks for people to get them off welfare and into work. And we're also making sure that beneficiaries know that their benefits will actually be protected from rising cost of living.
Is it a good look to cut those benefits? Well, cutting taxes.
Just be clear, we are not cutting anything. There will be an increase in benefits each and every year. We are making sure that actually beneficiaries are protected by increasing those benefits and adjusting them for the cost of living. That's the right way to go about it. Equally, we then are wanting to grow our economy so we create job opportunities to get people from welfare and into work. Katie.
Can I get some clarity on social housing and kind of order? There is no money after 2025 for building more state houses. Is that correct?
We have accepted the pre-election fiscal update allocation of capital to Kāinga Ora, which allows for the current build program that's happening. What we want to do is review the progress of that build program. Is it on track? Is it delivering efficiently? You know, $1 million a house is a lot.
Yeah.
Are we actually building houses in the right places? We want to look at how that capital is being used. Once we've conducted that review, we will be prepared in future to make capital allocations for new social housing. That's why we've left so much capacity in the multi-year capital allowance to allow for that sort of infrastructure investment. But we think it's irresponsible to keep topping up the capital allocations without looking at the efficiency with which Kāinga Ora is doing its job.
There are thousands of houses being built by Kāinga Ora right now. By stopping that, by providing that uncertainty for them, it's hard for them to keep going with that.
No, I
utterly reject that.
Disagree. We are committed to what was announced in the budget, and all we're doing is we're saying KO as an organisation we want to make sure is performing optimally. We want to understand procurement. We want to understand asset management practices. We want to understand their delivery ability. We're going to do a review. It's actually the right thing to do. If we're going to be putting so much money, we need to be sure that we've got a great organisation. And when you're starting to build houses at $1 million each, I just suggest to you there's an opportunity for us to actually ask some questions there. So don't misinterpret it as not being committed to building social or state housing. We are, but what we're doing is very responsible to say, look, you can't go pummeling in billions of dollars and actually not ask a genuinely good question about the relative performance of that organisation.
Can you rule out selling any more state houses as
Well, I just say to you, this government has sold 5,000 state houses, and the reason is quite simple. You end up with a house that's in the wrong place, in the wrong configuration, and it's quite normal. So there will be that will continue to go on, as there has been with this government. It's sold 5,000 houses already. But we are committed to the track that was laid out in the budget in May 2023. We think it's appropriate we do a solid review of Kāinga Ora to make sure it's a high-performing organisation that can actually deliver what it needs to deliver, and I think we're doing that appropriately.
A group of Māori leaders came out this morning calling on you to condemn what they are racist and race-based policies from the potential coalition partners. Will you do that?
Yeah, I condemn racism in all its form. I do, and so does the National Party. But what I'd say to you is this is Chris Hipkins, frankly, just throw a whole bunch of stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. This is I understand. What I'm saying to you is a conversation about race that Chris Hipkins has started is because he wants to create a campaign built on fear and negativity, and that is because he doesn't have a record to run on and he has no ideas to take this country forward. And importantly, I'm telling you now, New Zealanders watching, I want to focus on what's important to them. So yes, I condemn and abhor racism in all its forms, clear. But actually what New Zealanders want this election to be about is actually the issues that matter to them. And what matters to them is the cost of living, crime, health and education. And what I'm saying to you is, I appreciate he's a desperate guy at this point in time. But race is not a conversation in this election in terms of people want us to be focused on the things that they are caring about. And what they care about is economy.
Who started that conversation on race and not the likes of ACT and New Zealand First who are stirring this up against co-governance?
As I said, I condemn racism in all its forms completely. But I'm telling you right now, the New Zealand people are focused on the economy, cost of living. There are people today that are refixing their mortgages and having to find $700 a fortnight. I've given you my view, though. I condemn and reject racism in all its forms. Absolutely.
Are you committed to representing everyone, including Māori?
Absolutely, that is the job of the Prime Minister, and I'm very confident, having met with iwi leaders consistently over the last 6 months in small groups, talking about exactly how we would work together. I am very confident, as we have seen in previous governments, that we'll have a very strong relationship between the national government and Māori, because when Māori are doing well, New Zealand is doing well.
Names on that list, it looks like you haven't convinced those Māori leaders that you can be trusted. They are calling on you to take a very different stance in what you're doing.
Well, I can't be any clearer. We reject and abhor any form of racism.
Can we go back to 6.5% savings?
Yep.
At the moment, you've got the New Zealand dollar at the lowest it's been since 2008.
Yep.
How are departments expected to cope with that? MFAT, for example.
Well, as I've said, Richard, it will vary from department to department. In our tax policy, we have details of the sorts of things we thought departments would look at. For example, ending policy programs that are no longer priorities for the incoming government, stopping renovations or looking at downsizing their leases, looking at policy work that doesn't need to be ongoing, task forces, working groups, communications costs, advertising costs, public relations costs. There are a number of line items that every agency can look at. And the way I'd encourage you to think about it is this. There is not a family or small business in the country right now that hasn't had to do an exercise of looking at their outgoings, looking at their comings and working out what they can trim. Government departments should be no different.
Can I just have another crack at
Last question.
Another crack at this? So obviously you've admitted yourself that you will have to work with a coalition partner. That's ACT.
Strong preference is a national ACT coalition.
Very
Yep.
clear. But it could be New Zealand First as well. But looking at just any sort of...
Well, I just want to be clear, as a last resort, and it'll be up to them, and they haven't come with us in 27 years. Yep.
So in terms of how you're going to fund any coalition promises that you will have to make, is that coming out of the operating allowance that you've set today? And if it is, will that be included in your mini budget at the end of the year?
Again, I'm not getting into coalition agreements with the media. No, I understand the question, but we've demonstrated to you that we have a fiscal plan that has capacity in it.
This isn't a fiscal plan.
No.
You can't cost what ACT has said or
Sure.
you haven't in your plan. So you will need to have some contingencies. Is that coming out of...
And that's why you have coalition negotiations after an election. We're not doing it this side of an election.
Will it be in the mini budget? I think that's enough question. Will that mini budget?
We will have to think about that at that point in time and see, and factor that in for sure. But what I'd say to you right now is that there is plenty of capacity for us to actually deal with the shocks in the economy. This is our plan, and we will do coalition negotiations on the other side. We're not going to do it on this side.
Just quickly on another issue, what do you make of sanitarium cutting off supply of wheat bix and that shown issues with the competition in this grocery sector?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting report, and I think there actually are genuine concerns there, and I think it's a good test for our new grocery commissioner to get into and actually give some teeth and see and get to the bottom of what's actually happened there.
So do you think could be a competition? Do you think, for instance, that Woolworths and Foodstuffs may...
It could well be the case, and the Commerce Commission should explore it, and the Grocery Commissioner is the first test for the new Grocery Commissioner.
Have you seen Wayne Brown's comments about the Auckland regional fuel tax? If it was to be cut, Aucklanders would have to pay a lot more on rates, or would National pick up the bill?
Yeah, let me talk. I think Simeon talked to that as our Auckland spokesperson as well.
Yeah, so yes, have seen those comments. Our position is we've never supported the Auckland regional fuel tax, and we will remove it. There's $330 million unspent, which is sitting in Auckland Council's coffers to carry them through. We anticipate legislating in our first for the allowance of congestion or time of use charging, which will assist in the transport commitments in Auckland.
So that would replace the funding so projects can continue?
Eventually, but there is $330 million of unspent. Auckland Council has that sitting in their bank accounts right now, which they haven't spent for transport projects in Auckland.
Like all the money that you earn from the congestion pricing replace?
Well, ultimately, that would be going through the process, has to go through a process to determine and design that. But ultimately, that's the proposal that we put forward in our transport plan.
So would you concede that remove 4 cent excise on petrol?
It's 11.5 cents per litre.
Yeah, but it's going to make bugger all difference, really, isn't it? Given the fact that the
Well,
is going south
and
that oil prices are going north.
to families in South Auckland who are trying to get to work, 11.5 cents a litre in their car per litre is a lot of money.
Well, Waitomo, for example, say that the petrol will be at $3.50 by Christmas.
And I would say to those families in South Auckland, every cent off their fuel that we can assist them with will help.
Yep. Okay, team, can I say thank you so much for coming along. Appreciate your time. If there's any questions, Nicola and I are happy to talk to you one-on-one afterwards. Yep. Thank you.